War is fast becoming the thing natural, though abhorrent to my feelings. I go at it just as I used to go at lawsuits. Still, I am not by any manner of means fond of the profession. The idea of being continually employed in the destruction of human life is revolting in the extreme. William Nugent.
Today I'm headed out to the site called Fort Harrison. It's a significant fort that's out here on the Richmond defenses and part of the Richmond National Battlefield series. This location was known primarily for the attack that happened out here during the Battle of New Market, or Chaffin's Farm. The fort was overtaken at that time, and a major officer was actually killed here at this location during that battle. The Confederates tried to retake it, and Robert E. Lee himself actually created the attack to try to take this place back, but it never came back to the hands of the Confederates again. So we'll take you around to the fort and show you the different aspects of the fort, how the walls are built, the time periods and things like that. A little bit of a tour. Get around here at Fort Harrison, right outside of Richmond, Virginia. There's a lot of signs out here at this park that talk about the different aspects of the history that happened out here. One of the main aspects is the fact that the units at the time, called the U.S. Colored Troops, were actually out here after the Battle of New Market Heights. And 14 of the members of those units that were out there actually earned the Medal of Honor. The 4th was actually stationed out here just before entering the capital of Richmond in April of 1865. So this is a pretty unique place to visit. There's a lot of good history here. Where I'm at right now is at the park headquarters. It used to be the actual park headquarters for Richmond Battlefield when it was a state park, designated as a state park. And currently it is a visitor center for this place, but it's temporarily closed, so we can't get inside. In 1959, however, the park headquarters moved, and this building essentially just became a more of a visitor center than anything else. So in 1862, a 30-year-old lieutenant named William Harrison supervised the construction of the fort, and it eventually bore his name. He was an engineer, and he was educated at Virginia Military Institute. He died in Northern Virginia in 1873. Now, in September of 1864, that campaign that I talked about took place, and Hiram Burnham was a brigadier general that took part of this battle here to take this fort. Unfortunately for him, this was the last battle that he would take part in, because he was killed here at this fort. And the Federal soldiers that took this place renamed the fort after him. It was called Fort Burnham. Directly behind me here is what would have been known as a traverse. So when the enemy comes in and takes this fort, they end up having to put in traverses in here because the Confederate soldiers are firing cannons at this fort on a regular basis to try to weaken the defenses in here. And now directly behind me here is a main set of works that was part of the fort, and they were strengthened and put together to work better for the Federals because of the attack that was imminent, that was going to come from the Confederates. So what they would do is they would build traverses inside the fort, like the one behind me here, which stretches across the length of the fort, so that when the cannons or the cannonballs were flying into the fort and coming in this direction from another location, this could protect the troops from those cannons, and it wouldn't be a clear shot all the way across the fort itself. Because if you fire a cannon from the direction of the fortification, the way this is normally built, you have a long stretch of trenches, then you have a fort location, and then another stretch of trenches, and then another fort. Well, cannons are firing from those other forts that used to be a part of this, and the cannonballs are coming in and just clean shot all the way across from one side to the other. So the traverses are put in here to kind of slow that down and stop that from happening, so that the damage is minimized whenever the cannonballs are flying in. I hope that better explains it. As you can see, it's pretty tall, and this is after 160 years. So, and then you have the wide open parade grounds back here behind me. You can see clean across to the front side of the fort itself. And then the Confederate earthworks right there. And what you're looking at here are the Confederate earthworks inside the fort, and then one of the locations where the cannons would have been placed. And off in this direction right over here is where one of the main assaults happened on Fort Harrison in September of 1864. In this location, a lot of hand-to-hand combat actually took place, and there were about 200 defenders of this fort. Nearly all of them ended up being casualties here at this fort. And a casualty on the Union side was Mr. Burnham, like we talked about earlier. He actually came up over the walls here somewhere in this location and was shot and clutched his chest and fell to the ground. And all of the witnesses that saw the action here said that he was probably killed somewhere in this location. Now, as I'm walking past the earthworks here, we'll talk about the casualties on Mr. Stannard's men. Mr. Stannard's men lost about 750 men on the attack here at this fort, which is a pretty significant amount of men. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean inside this fort, but out front of this fort as well. And once the Federals had their hands on this location, it was pretty much a Union fort until the end of the war, all the way up until the fall of Richmond in April of 1865. They continued to build high walls and trenches like this, the Confederates did, further away, because they lost this position. Now, to my rear here, off in that direction, about 3 miles away, an additional set of earthworks were built later on to defend Richmond, because once they lost this location, they had to put something else up, as the noose was tightening, if you will. The defense works were getting smaller and closer to Richmond, and Petersburg was becoming very important to the fight, the contest here. Now, directly behind me is that Confederate earthworks, like we were talking about, and then the exit point over here for the park to leave where the earthworks are. Now, the very next day from that battle, Robert E. Lee actually personally created an assault for this fort to try to take it back because it was just that important to him. The assault, however, failed, and the fort continued to be in the hands of the Federal Army. The small sign behind me details the fact that General Grant was actually inside of this fort not too long after it was taken, about 3.5 hours afterwards. And there was a small traverse that was in this location that's no longer here. And General Grant sat down to write out some orders. Well, as he took a seat and his other officers were around him, a shell come flying overhead and burst in the air. And the general narrowly escaped being killed here inside of Fort Harrison. Now, no one actually sketched the action, and there were no photographs at that time to show the location, but they do know for a fact it was here where I'm standing now. And it was one of those situations that throughout the war happens again and again. A significant person gets put in a place of danger and somehow escapes the danger. Kind of like Abraham Lincoln on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. in the forts there. Directly in front of me here is a protected area that a well was dug, and they say likely for the Confederate soldiers here and then captured with the fort itself. Now, there's a story about this well. The well was placed here, and the Federal soldiers, when they captured the location, afraid that the Confederates knew where the well was, that the Confederates were going to fire in and try to attack that location and destroy that well. So they dug a well around here somewhere adjacent to this location, so that they would at least have one spot that it could pull or draw water from inside the fort. Now, everyday life inside a fort is filled with tedium, especially when there's nothing going on. And all you can do is build on the fortifications itself and wait for the next attack to happen. You can imagine a couple hundred soldiers sitting inside here can get bored pretty quick. But when you have a constant barrage of cannons that are being fired and muskets, you have to protect yourself at all times. Now, this fort actually sits on top of a hill, and it's kind of hard to see when you're inside the fort itself, the location, because at the time, during all those battles, this entire area was cleared out. The trees in front would have been gone. right out directly in front of the fort. So at this time, I'll talk about a little bit of orientation. So behind me here is going in the direction towards Richmond. This is the rear guard of the Confederates back here. Now going off in this direction, behind me over here is another series of trench works and a fort further down. And then across that yard back here is the direction that the Union soldiers would have been coming from during the attack in September of 1864. You can't see out front of these walls today because of all the trees that are in place. But directly out front there, back in 1864 and 65, you would have been able to look up over top of these walls straight across to Fort Beauregard out there towards Richmond. And the scene would have been just clear and flat all the way across. You could see the trench works popped up all the way across the landscape as well. The land would have been scarred from where the trees were chopped down, and mostly dirt, some grass out there, and makeshift huts and tents all over the place. Now, another officer that fell wounded here seriously, but not mortally, was Mr. Ord. He fell here inside this fort as well. And he was one of the main officers in charge of this attack. Fighting here was pretty intense. It wasn't the bloodiest of fights because New Market Heights probably took the ticket for that. You're talking 750 soldiers around here for casualties, and then the all-encompassing total would have been roughly 2,300 in other locations. So it was a pretty intense fight. That last sign shows a photograph of a bomb-proof where they would have stowed ammo and black powder. It's a good location to keep it underground so that when cannonballs come in and hit the location, it's not going to explode. It's going to protect that gunpowder. Now, it pointed in the direction of the actual, one of the entryways here through some of the trenches that's inside the fort. But most likely, that entry was right here where the sign was, and then the bomb-proof itself, the deep depression behind me, is most likely where that bomb-proof is, if you can see that right there. Just over my shoulder. And so, essentially what you do is you dig a hole down underneath, you pile dirt up around it, you stack things and make it a structure, and then you put the gunpowder inside. Kind of like some of the brick defenses and the concrete defenses that we've seen in World War II videos. The gunpowder goes inside, and anything that can explode stays in there. It's a cool place for it to be. And like I said about the cannonballs coming inside, you don't want some spark or something to hit that, because once it goes off, it's going to take out a major portion of the walls around here and probably kill a lot of men. Now, this unique picture that is here on this sign. It shows a photograph that was taken by photographer T.C. Roach in November of 1864. And he actually stood on the traverse back here, right behind me, and stood on top of it at the risk of his own safety to take the photograph that is displayed here on the sign. And off in the distance, you can barely make out a Union picket soldier from the 7th United States Colored Troops. And he's standing out there on picket, far advanced of the safety of these walls, just in case there's an attack coming from the fort in front of him, which is Fort Beauregard. And if you look at the top of that photograph, you can barely make out a Confederate soldier standing atop of the walls over there, kind of watching what's happening over here. That's everyday fort life during the American Civil War. Their positions are opposed to each other, and when there's nothing going on, they're just simply standing around watching each other, waiting for the next attack. It's a pretty unique view. Today, you can't see very far from here, so just past the walls, you're basically going to see a bunch of trees, which is great during the fall, and it's great for a visit. So where I'm standing now is facing the direction of the counter-assault that General Robert E. Lee himself put together. He brought to this location 5,000 men under Field and Hoke. And the day after that major attack, when this fort fell, they brought men directly in front of me and counterattacked this location and fought like crazy to get up these breastworks and try to take this fort back. But it was a little too late. It wasn't going to happen. The Union infantry that stood here with very little protection in the location I'm at, they didn't have time to build up substantial trench works from this location, because this is a back-facing portion here of the fort. But they stood here and stood their ground, and they fought valiantly and defended this fort that they had just captured, which turns out to be one of the only couple of things that was captured during that assault. Newmarket Heights being another location. This could have been a real turn of events had the other assaults on the different forts that were around here that had taken place was actually successful, because they could have rolled up Richmond on that day, but it didn't happen. General Robert E. Lee himself, like I said, was part of bringing those reinforcements here. So he was actually at this location ensuring that the fight was taking place. As we stand here inside the fort, I saw something that caught my eye. And it was a description of something that was seen here about 5 years after the war. And it says, "We saw in a small field northwest of the fort about 50 or more bodies, or the bones of bodies. And in the adjacent bushes were 4 times the number. The tenant of the land had gathered up 2 large piles of bones and burnt them to ashes." And that was from the Richmond Dispatch, April 8th of 1869. The land out here, which was highly contested at that time, years and years and years and years after the war, more and more men and their bodies were showing up on these fields. Now, the United States did all that it could do to try to bring home the Federal soldiers to the surrounding cemeteries that they put in place. The Confederacy, on the other hand, was no longer in existence after the war. And so families were traveling these fields and trying to dig up bodies and bring them back to cemeteries for proper burial. But there's no doubt in my mind that out here at this fort and other places like it, there are probably plenty of casualties that are still left behind, undiscovered. I'm on the outside of the fort itself right now, and the location behind me here is that spot that we talked about earlier. It talks about hand-to-hand combat taking place here. and the general coming up over this wall and being killed as he came inside the fort. And right around the corner from where I'm at is where General Grant actually ended up being in harm's way as well. So we'll go walk over there and take a video from the outside of that location. Out in this location down here, going directly downhill, is a spot that was called the Killing Fields. Now this is that wide open space where the Union soldiers are coming from. They're actually coming up this large hill here, and they're going directly towards the fort right here. Now off in the distance there, you can see the traverse that we were talking about earlier. It runs in that way. And then this is the place that I filmed where the cannon was on the inside. The majority of the action that took this fort actually took place on this side of the fort itself. Now over here are the original Confederate earthworks of the fort. And you can tell by looking at the size of these earthworks. This is not a very easy task. You see how the hill goes down inside where they dug in and trenched in and then raised the banks up. That is a huge problem when you're facing the enemy. It has cannons on top, muskets at the ready, and they're firing those carbines down on top of you as you're coming across this open field. So the only way that they were able to attack here and win this was simply by surprise. In the early morning hours of that day in 1864, they surprised the enemy, and they overcame the odds here against this fort and took Fort Harrison. Standing here, looking at these defenses and how deep the ditches go down, and then the walls come way up on the other side here. Can't help but quote something I've read along the way about the fight that took place here. The men nobly respond to their officer's call and pour over the edge of the ditch into the dry moat, and then scrambling up the bank, some on hands and knees, some stepping on their bayonets, thrust into the clay, some on each other's shoulders. The blue column mounts the parapet, lingers a moment in a fierce blaze of musketry on its crest, and finally, overflowing all barriers, pushes across the parade ground. And that was from William S. Hubbell, 21st Connecticut Infantry. So as I always do in these videos, I like to talk about a particular individual, usually a Medal of Honor recipient. And this battle is no different than others. Cecil Clay was a captain out here, the 58th Pennsylvania Infantry, the good old Yinzers. And he was scaling the wall here at this dry moat, and he snatches up a flag. Now this is a 22-year-old man we're talking about. He climbs all the way to the top of this wall, and he takes that flag and he waves it around violently so that his men can see that their leader is at the top, and inspire them to come to the top with him and get over those walls. Well, while he's up there, he's actually shot. He's felled here in this place. Obviously the flag going down with him. But in 1892, his heroism was recognized with the Medal of Honor. And so if you come out to Fort Harrison, you can actually stand in a place of significance and visit grounds where amazing things took place. They shaped the country and kept kept us the United States of America, right here at Fort Harrison, just outside of Richmond, Virginia, in Henrico. It's been fun coming out here to Fort Harrison and bringing a little bit of the history to you and showing you around. Like I said before, I'm not a historian, I'm just a traveler. And I love going to these places and making videos so that if you can't get there, you can enjoy it. Maybe you can get there someday and see it for yourself. Fort Harrison, Henrico, very well preserved. Unfortunately, the other locations like Newmarket Heights are not as preserved, but this is one of the better places. So come on out here and check it out for yourself. From Fort Harrison, this is History with Waffles. Until next time.
A recent study puts the number of dead in the American Civil War as high as 850,000. Roughly 1,264,000 American soldiers have died in the nation's wars, 620,000 in the Civil War, and 644,000 in all other conflicts. It was only as recently as the Vietnam War that the number of American deaths in foreign wars eclipsed the number who died in the Civil War.